our stresses can stress or impact our pregnancy in a negative way, just thinking that can also make it difficult. So I think it's really important to understand and respect that as pregnant women and as human beings, we're going to have ups and downs. And when we're pregnant, we're modeling a safe and correct release of those emotions, because there's going to be emotions and there's going to be difficult things going on, and our babies can, they can feel that and they can understand when we're releasing as well. So it's important as well for us as parents to model safe releasing of emotions, I think.
Welcome everyone to my second interview on my YouTube channel. And today I have the pleasure to interview Rachel Huffman from Creative Birth. And I met Rachel through JCK. She connected us. And what I absolutely love and why I want to share what Rachel has to say with you is because she has a gift for every pregnant woman and mother to be, which I would have loved for myself with my first daughter being pregnant. So I'm going to bring you on, just changing the view, and I would love to know first if you could share, Rachel, how many children you have and how you started out, and now I think it's changing a bit, and how you found that calling, that passion you have as you call it doula, we call it midwife here in Ireland. Yeah, thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for that lovely introduction. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about my story. I'm Rachel. I've got 4 children. They are 18, 16, 12 and 3. And I became a doula 13 years ago now, after I had my second daughter. So I had a great experience of my first birth. I was told that I would need to have a cesarean when I first went for my first appointment, which really surprised me, and I couldn't understand what that was all about. I had already done some reading for some reason. I guess I just felt drawn to reading about birth. I don't have any idea why. None of it wasn't something that was in my background, though my mum's a nurse, but she didn't do births. She didn't work in midwifery. But I felt really drawn to it. So I was reading about it and I thought, I just need to find a different way. I don't want to go down a medical route, which is, once I get an idea in my head, I'm a bit difficult to deter. So when I was told I needed a cesarean, I was quite shocked. And so I decided that where I lived was opposite from the midwifery unit. So I could literally see them out of my window. I decided that I was going to wait as long as possible to call a midwife, and I was going to give birth at home. So against all of the, and to the surprise and shock of all of the midwifery team, because where I lived back then was in the north of England, and they hadn't heard of a home birth. They didn't have a home birth kit. They didn't know what to do with me, and they weren't prepared. So as it happened, I was able to free birth my first baby, which was fantastic. And after, I wanted to share my experience, but it wasn't met very well. I found that a lot of people were very, very traumatized by the experience that they've had, which I could understand. And I wanted to learn more so that I could help people in a peer-centered way. I didn't want to feel like anybody was thinking I was trying to tell them they should do something or another. I wanted to be a peer and a friend to other women giving birth. So as it happened, my next experience was not so easy. And I think that was a massive learning curve for me. I had a posterior baby and it took a very, very long time for her to be born, and I wasn't prepared. I wasn't expecting it. And I think what that taught me was a real appreciation for some of the hard times that mums have been through, and what the next steps are, what that feels like. being sort of letting go and being in front of other people, because where I'd had a free birth before, I had no midwife in the room. So this was all new experiences, and I think that it gave me the motivation and the strength to go forward and then relate with other mums. So I then did my doula training. So I then set up a community group, because obviously I had two small children, so to get out to births was a bit tricky. So I set up groups in our community with midwives, doulas and mums, where we just meet up for coffee and cake and talk about birth. So we had lots and lots of that going on, that we did for a few years. And got into working and actually attending births, which has been fantastic, and lots of postnatal work as well. I support parents after the baby has arrived and getting settled, and all of that goes along with that. So yeah, so that's been the last few years.
And I'm going to ask you a question about that later on. I wasn't familiar with it until I met you. So in case somebody doesn't know what free birth is, does it mean that there is no midwife? It's just you? And what is there a definition for the term free birth?
That's right. Yeah, there is a definition for free birth. So free birth is birthing with whoever you choose and wherever you choose. It is legal. Lots of people have questions about that, and I do run a course for people who are interested in that, where we go into the legal side and also the emotional preparation for something like that, because free birth is not about not going to hospital because we don't want to, or not inviting people because we feel afraid. It's about taking responsibility for our choices and our body, and that's so I feel really strongly about that area, and it's something that I feel like everybody should explore, so that they can learn a bit more about it and then make their decision based on the understanding of what options are available for all of us. So there's a whole spectrum of options available to birthing mums, but we're not always told that. So
and in preparation for our chat, I was actually thinking about that as well. You know, that's kind of my aim for bringing you on, you know, to hear that there is something else out there and that there is a choice, you know, and you're not, like, I loved when you said you're not telling someone how to give birth, you know, whatever way they choose. But I always like, and it's the same with my parenting approach, that you have an option, you've got different tools available, and you are free to choose, you know. And that kind of leads me into my first real big question, you know, which is, and you just said that, Rachel, that my first experience, so I've got two children, almost teenager and a 9-year-old, and with my first birth, I wanted everything natural, you know, and I didn't even know what that meant. I just went, you know, I wanted natural, and had no idea. And how it then happened is it was the opposite to natural, you know. So I was attached to loads of drips, and my body couldn't handle the induced contractions, and it just didn't work together. So I ended up having everything I didn't want to. And then luckily I went out, and after I had given birth, you know, I made new friends because I didn't know anyone. I was the first mom in my circle of friends. And then 3 years later, when I had my son, I had so much knowledge, you know, that at that time then, you know, I had planned on giving birth standing up, and, you know, I was squatting throughout my pregnancy, and that experience was so different. I ended up giving birth standing up and pulling him out myself, you know, and it was almost, and that's also another question later on, it was this empowering and taking control back and not giving it to someone else to decide. And it's almost a bit a theme of that gift that my son brought me, you know, to say, no, you've got that power, you know, don't give it away. And he reminds me daily of that, as in, don't take my power away from me, you know. So my first question is a long lead up, but I was so afraid as a first time parent, you know, or mother giving birth. And even whenever I came across pain, or even I only needed to see someone in pain, and I had this coping mechanism of sometimes fainting. So I didn't know, would I even faint during giving birth of my own daughter, you know? And my question is to you, what would you recommend to women who are pregnant to take away a little bit of that fear of what to expect, you know, like it could go either way, and it's such an overwhelming thing, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. And I really, really relate to that. I would even go as far to say that before I had my first son, I had tocophobia. I was so frightened.
Had
I knew that I
say that.
tocophobia, so a
Oh,
fear of
no.
childbirth.
Okay.
And I think that's what led me into all of this reading, because I guess I knew that as a woman at some point in my life I'd be giving birth, and I felt like, and I was only really young, I was like 20 years old, and I felt I need to understand this because it really, really frightens me. And the way that birth is portrayed in the media, and you know, if I would watch a film or TV, that I would see birth being this awful kind of medical event, and it frightened me a lot, and I didn't want that, you know. So I can really, really relate to where you were at with that. And I think the real key is knowledge. Knowledge is power. And I think, because, as I mentioned, when I get an idea in my head, I really go take it all the way. And I think that's what I did. I just read absolutely everything I can get my hands on. And I think that now that we have, because back then it was all books, there wasn't much online. And I think now we have access to like some really great resources that will take us from that stage, like all the way to here
Mhm.
are my possibilities, which is more like reading a lot of books back in the day. And I think that now you can find that information. Also, the great thing about the internet is that you can find other people who've actually experienced these great positive births, and you can connect with them. And I think the two keys are understanding what your choices are, and that is going the whole way to finding out what your choices are, what different interventions and steps take place in each venue of choice,
Mhm.
and then knowing what your deal breakers are as well. So if there are things that you're like, okay, I'm prepared to go for this, but I'm absolutely not prepared to go for that, knowing that beforehand gives you so much power during birth, because you can skip out certain things, or you can choose to hang on for certain things. And those decisions are the ones where I get mum saying to me, you know what, this wasn't quite what I wanted, but I knew I didn't want that, and I got to choose. And that's the difference between a difficult, I mean, birth is going to be a challenge, but that's the difficult difference between a positive experience and a really traumatic experience, is having those choices and understanding what they were. So that's what I think is the best place to start, is to get yourself as informed as possible. Find people, find a community, find a doula, chat and talk through, and then work out what your fears are and what your deal breakers are. So
Wow. I love what you said. You said knowing the deal breakers, it's almost like that's something that you can take through into also your parenting, isn't it? That you're very clear on what I sometimes say, pick your battles and then follow
yes,
through on them, you know?
absolutely, yeah, yeah,
And that is so, isn't it so important to kind of go in with that, you know, to really know this is my boundary,
yeah.
and easy
Boundaries.
to stick to the boundary, isn't it?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
because when you know what it is and everybody on your team knows what your boundary is, you're much more likely to stay within it. And that's going to help your mental health and your parenting journey and everything going forwards from that.
yeah.
Very important.
And speaking of mental health, you know, so my next question is a little bit more into that area. So I just a few years, and I think it's another gift to prepare me for being a parent. A few years before having children, I started practicing transcendental meditation, you know. And I didn't think anything of it. But at the time when I told my meditation teacher that I am pregnant, she said, oh, keep it up if you can, even once a day, because it will be so good for your babies. And I hadn't really known anything about it. And then my children were born, you know, and after I overcame the whole dealing with the fussy baby and knowing it's better to carry them in a sling, I was amazed how calm it then was, you know. They when they were up and they were just looking around, and even people commented that they are quite calm, you know. I always told myself, maybe it is because of the meditation that I practiced, you know. And then on the opposite scale, because it's always the two, isn't it? On the opposite, like stress levels can equally impact pregnant or the baby can be in the womb impacted by the stress levels. And my whole life, you know, what has been this theme is something that I work on all the time, is that I have a bit of fear of being retaliated against when I speak my truth. And I found out something last year, that my mom was in a situation, I won't share details just to protect her story, that she couldn't really speak her truth about being pregnant with me. And that I was wondering, since I found out, is there maybe some connection? And there's been, I think, more research coming out lately, and I only heard Gabor Mate speak about it, that there is definitely research on that topic. And I would love to know what you know. I don't know if you know of research sources or what you know in the bigger scheme of things, you know, what that there is a connection and what moms can do, or is there any point, you know?
Definitely. I love that. And I love that you brought up Gabor Mate, because I'm actually reading When the Body Says No at the moment. So we do have these synchronicities, don't we? And I love him. I love his ideas about the way that stress impacts different areas of the body. And it's really important, absolutely. But on the same token as well, like the idea that our stresses can stress or impact our pregnancy in a negative way, just thinking that can also make it difficult. So I think it's really important to understand and respect that as pregnant women and as human beings, we're going to have ups and downs. Mm-hmm. And when we're pregnant, we're modeling a safe and correct release of those emotions, because there's going to be emotions and there's going to be difficult things going on, and our babies can, you know, they can feel that and they can understand when we're releasing as well. So it's important as well for us as parents to model safe releasing of emotions, I think.
Oh, wow.
Although I'm not going to say that I'm the best at that. So, but it's a learning curve and we're all learning. And it's also important not to beat ourselves up, because we are where we are. We need to accept where we are at the time. But wow, there's so much as well that we can do, you know, to positively impact our pregnancy. Just understanding, like you said, there is such a connection between mum and baby. And if you are able to use meditation or some kind of it might be hypnobirthing, because that, you know, that's the one thing that I certainly connect with, but you might use different types of meditation to connect with baby. And it's interesting because my daughter, my second daughter, who took a long time being born, I felt very, very connected with her. And it was interesting because during the labor, I was asking her, like, what do I need to do? Because you're not coming out. And I really felt her saying to me, spin, you must spin, and you need to spin. So I was just going round and round in the bathroom, kind of dancing and spinning and trying to work out. And it wasn't until after I'd had her that a midwife explained to me that she had been posterior. So that meant that her back was against my back, and it was causing me backache, and it meant that it was much more difficult for her to descend. So I didn't understand that. I didn't know anything about the mechanics of birth at this point, and it was very difficult. And the fact that she was telling me to spin, she understood, and she wanted spinning and dancing. And the funny thing is that she is a dancer and she always spins and dances, so it's almost like I was getting some of her essence, and she was definitely connecting herself. So I do think that there's a lot to be gained from listening and following. It's not just us giving birth, it's not just us when we're pregnant, there's another person there, and just being aware and listening into any messages that they might have that can help.
That is, I absolutely love that answer, because that gives us permission as well to, to be human and have fears, and and that there even is in the fear that there's a learning already for the baby. I had never thought about it that way. I know this from the parenting approach that I obviously try to practice most of the time, but it's when we make mistakes, and it's not that we have a fear and we should apologize, but if we ever make mistakes around human beings, if we then go and apologize, and I learned that from Dan Siegel, it's that we teach our child so much more about the world, as opposed to when they grow up in a perfect household where never mistakes are made, so that sounds like they're already learning about resilience in the womb by, my mom is feeling fear and then she calms down. And I love that, to picture that.
Yeah, and I mean, and we do the same with our babies, don't we? Because when they're here and they begin, they feel fear, or they feel hunger, or they feel something, and we're able to then calm them and help them to calm down. So again, you mentioned slings earlier, and that's one way that we can really connect with our child when they're born, because being skin to skin and being and smelling and understanding, we begin to understand our baby, and our baby begins to understand the world through us, through our heartbeat, through our breath, and they begin to understand things. So as we go through what we call the fourth trimester, which is the 3 months after the baby's born, but really it's more like 9 months, we teach them coping mechanisms, and to understand what it's like to live within their own body by bringing their body as close to ours as we can. So that's a really good way of connecting and coping. Like, as you say, life is very much calmer for a baby who is attached to its mother or parents, and it doesn't have to just be mum either, but just being held and being upright, it aids digestion. There's so many benefits to holding your baby as much as you can, rather than, I hear such a lot of, shouldn't I put him down yet, shouldn't I put her down yet, because won't they learn to self-soothe? Well, I will tell you for definite, they do all learn, and it doesn't have to be done by putting down. Now, some babies will be put down, and if you've got a baby that will be put down and you can go do things, then absolutely, I'm not saying don't do that, but when they need holding, extensive holding is a really positive, has a lot of positive benefits for your children and you as well.
And in those, what you described, those first 9 months until they start getting a bit more active and maybe a bit more behavioral stuff comes in, I heard in those early months, you can never spoil a baby, right?
That's right. You can't. And because there's a need, and I think we were going to talk about breastfeeding in a bit as well, and it kind of goes together, is that there's a real need for the mum and the baby to be close to each other and skin to skin, and that, rather than spoiling, is more, it's a form of nurture, and it teaches the baby self-care as well. So it's teaching it not only self-care, self-soothing. It, the baby knows as well that they are able to relax and go to sleep and do what they need to do without feeling the fear of wondering where they are, and their startle reflex and all the hormones that go along with that. So there's a lot of benefits there to extended holding of your baby.
And another thing, we could talk about this for ages, but I do want to come on to the last question, is I don't know if you know the Dr. Sayers book. Do you know?
Yes. That is literally, I recommend that to everybody, actually.
That was my Bible, because that book, it's as opposed to just having the one option and that's how you should do it, the couple gives you so many options and explanations on how it all works, how babies sleep. And what I learned in that book is that what a gift to your child, you know, if they don't have to spend their energy trying to not fight, but wasting their energy trying to be picked up by you. If you hold them and have them in a sling with hands free, they can invest all their energy into already learning what they need to learn at that age. I love that as well.
Absolutely. I love that you picked that book, because that is literally the book that I would go for
Yeah.
as my go-to for everything. Absolutely. Yeah, I had it with my first, and I refer everybody to it if they want to have a medical understanding of a attachment kind of parenting. That is absolutely where to go. So yeah, I would certainly recommend that people have a look at that book for an understanding of these concepts as well.
I'll put it in the description below, because I sometimes just bought it and gave it as a present
Did
when
you?
somebody was pregnant, you know. And from that book, you know, that this is so funny. That book was so aligned, Rachel. So what happened to me, I found that, and this is, I think times have moved on in Ireland and probably the UK as well, but at about 13 years, when I gave birth to my firstborn, the breastfeeding wasn't that widely spread yet, you know, and it wasn't as normal as it probably hopefully is now. And I found it so hard to get support with the breastfeeding. And in hindsight, because of all the magic that the hormones do when we give birth and how fast we forget, you know, I was rolled out of the delivery suite with the newborn, and the midwife said, "Will you be back soon for your second one?" And I went, "Yes," having forgotten everything I went through for the past 24 hours. And
Wow.
and so in hindsight, I would say the start of the breastfeeding with both children was way harder than giving birth, you know. So with my first child, because nobody explained the latching on properly, I had bleeding nipples, you know, and then for some kind of strange, again, it's probably some kind of protection or my daughter wanting really to breastfeed, you know, I had this determination to keep going with it. And I found myself going to 2 or 3 different breastfeeding groups here in Cork City, you know, and to just get some help and support, because a GP at the time had said breastfeeding isn't for everyone and it doesn't work with everyone. And I would, you don't have to say what you think about that, but I always wondered what, if it's maybe just the lack of support that women give up on breastfeeding. And then that's kind of my last question, you know. I would have loved to, I mean, in person is amazing, but to imagine that you're sitting there as a breastfeeding mom and you can just throw on your phone and maybe link into an online breastfeeding class. I don't know if you do offer that or not.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
and my question is, if somebody's thinking about breastfeeding, and again, I'm not saying everyone has to do that, you know, it's whatever you want to. I wanted to do it. Um, if somebody's thinking about whether to maybe book a session with you or what they can do, and they're doubting whether to do that or not, what would you say to them? That
Yeah,
much.
that's a really good question. And again, it goes back to my first answer, really, is getting informed as much as you possibly can. I do run a course for newborns, so parenting newborns, that's a 2-session course, and a breastfeeding preparation course as well. I think that, I mean, we're told that breastfeeding is a feeding system. So when we feed, it's every 2 hours. And we get a kind of a mindset of like, okay, my baby's going to take a drink and it's going to be this much. And then they're going to be full. And then I'm going to put them down and do other things. And as you know, certainly that was my concept. I had no idea the lifestyle that came along with breastfeeding, and it would have helped me so much personally to have a bit of understanding of what was going to happen, what the kind of time scale this was going to look like, and what kind of support that I could have organized for myself to make it easier. Because I think, you know, we have these pictures, and it still happens now, and I know that 13 years ago things are a bit different, but I still find that if I'm looking at new mums, they're up doing 5 million things, they're and they're expected to look a certain way and kind of jolly each other into looking and behaving in a certain way, and that is really contrary to how breastfeeding is and how it can affect our behavior. So I think it's really important to manage our expectations of what breastfeeding is going to be like. And certainly, as you say, there's options for mixed feeding and doing different things, but when we understand the concepts of how these kind of feeds work, then we can work together to make it work for us. Because sometimes we will get into a situation where we have a breastfeeding mum, the feeding's not working. At 2 o'clock in the morning she's going out getting bottles, and the baby then takes a bottle, is full, and everything just goes downhill. We stop breastfeeding. And the reason for that can be because we didn't know beforehand that we could add in a mixed feed if we wanted to, or prepare ourselves for that eventuality, and then that one feed could have been all that we needed to get ourselves back onto breastfeeding how we want to. So we don't always know like what are our options. So again, just getting that getting ourselves prepared, getting our information ready, and then we can link to some books and have a look and understand what we need to. But and absolutely, I would say you're right about in-person support, finding in-person support, because when we do need help with positioning and latching and things that go along with breastfeeding, it really is important to have another woman who has fed or who can understand what the latch should look like beside us at the time. Because that's going to make all the difference. We don't necessarily know what feeding should look or feel like, and we're looking down, whereas somebody else is looking towards us and can understand the motion that the mouth is making, all of that. And then once we feel it, then we go, okay, now that's correct. But until we have that, it can be really, really challenging. And certainly I had the same experience as you. I found that I wasn't expecting the challenge. I was thinking, baby boob, we're all good. But it wasn't simple, certainly wasn't simple for us and for any of my children. So it's really important that I would say, to prepare yourself for that journey.
Wow. And that's exactly it. And if the viewers do have more than one child, we come also then with an expectation. I had no idea that I would actually be feeding my first child for almost a year, until I went fully back to work. And then I thought, oh, I've got this now sorted out with the second one, and I thought it would be easy breezy. And then my second child, and I don't know, I think I might have read boys are more prone to it or not, but he had a lip and a tongue tie, and I didn't even think about it when I was overly concerned with the firstborn that she would have that, And then I was 6 weeks into the journey and not sleeping at all until it was diagnosed because it was missed. And so it's to bring it back to the expectation, and what you, and I'm going to close it with this, what you just reminded me of, Rachel, is when we have someone else there with us, because we weren't meant to do this by ourselves, I think, to have that different perspective. And you just literally said this so nicely: when you have your baby latched on, someone opposite you has a different perspective to what the latch looks like. And that's what community is all about, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts or recommendations? I'm going to share your website below as well. People would like to contact you. And
I think we've covered everything really well. I think it's, as you said, it's community, and it's really important when we go on a new journey and when it's parenthood, is to get our ducks in a row, learn what we're going to go through, and get some support around us, because I think that there's lots of people out there who can give really, really good support. So find your team when you get going.
And I think go with what resonates and leave the rest, isn't it? That's what.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, everybody's going to do things differently, and that's I think parenting gives you a really thick skin. If you haven't already got one from your last experiences over the last few years, it will give you a really thick skin. And if you do get to go through a positive birth experience, I feel like parents are so much more empowered to make their own choices once they come through that. They feel, okay, I'm going to be able to make this decision. I'm not going to question myself. I'm going to be able to follow my instincts. So that's something that is really important. And if you have had a really difficult or traumatic experience as well, it's important to get help for that too. That's something that we also can offer as doulas, and there's different therapies that we can offer. And the reason for that is because when we have a difficult birth, it's almost like an alarm goes off in our brain. There's a scientific kind of explanation to this is very basic explanation, and it doesn't shut off basically. So a trauma will set off this alarm in our system, and it's going off all the time. So when we're bringing home our new baby and trying to cope, we've got all of this going on, and it won't shut off until we actually address that trauma. And when we do, all of that can move on, and we're able to get back on the track that we were going on. So again, if you have had a positive experience, then great, it will set you up for making decisions towards parenting. If you haven't, it's also easy to get through. There are programs that will help you to get back on where you want to be.
Brilliant. Thanks for mentioning that, because I didn't remember that you had that as well in your services that you offer.
Sure.
It's so multi-talented. It's unbelievable. It is believable. You're doing it. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
I'm going to leave it there. And because you do have such a wide service and experience, I will have you on hopefully very soon for another chat about a different topic. And
I would love that.
Yeah, we're going to leave it here for now. So thank you very much for watching, everyone.